she sit straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming. And I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. It's about that long. And she rolled against it and cut right here. Best I could tell. And I'm no medic. It cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Well, right here.
He described where he stabbed.
These were just some of the chilling confessions made by the truck driver who had been targeting women while crisscrossing America. Adam was born on August 6, 1964 in Jonesville, a small town in North Carolina, USA. He dropped out of high school early. Adam was a tall, burly man with a thick, rough beard. He was married to Miriam Benge for 5 years. Their relationship was rocky because, according to Miriam, Adam thought women were beneath him and that he could do whatever he wanted with them. He was abusive to Miriam and even to his own mother, whom he insulted and hit. In 1993, the couple divorced. That year, Adam became a truck driver and began traveling along the East Coast. He drove trucks and worked part-time at a chicken processing plant near his home in Jonesville. Years later, he settled down with another woman. They lived in a trailer home with 3 daughters. Adam had never been in serious trouble, but those who knew him described him as dismissive of women and often antisocial, controlling, and always ready to pick a fight. A former co-worker traveled with Adam in his truck for about a month in the late 90s, covering much of the country. His co-worker eventually refused to work with him any longer because of Adam's constant negativity, argumentative nature, and disrespectful attitude towards women. In his truck, Adam carried a DVD of a horror movie called Hunting Humans. The film, about a serial killer who stalked and then knifed his victims, had a huge impact on him. So much so that when he set out on his trucking trips to the northeastern United States in the summer of 2007, the first things he packed were the DVD, 2 large hunting knives, a torch, and a leather mask with holes for the eyes and mouth. In July 2007, Adam left North Carolina and headed east on Interstate 78, with stops planned in Massachusetts and New Hampshire. Early on July 13, 2007, Darlene Ewald, a 42-year-old mother of 2, was on the phone in the backyard of her home in the middle-class suburb of West Hanover Township, Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. While she spoke, her husband Todd, a carpenter and youth soccer coach, and their children, Nick and Nicole, ages 24 and 21, were asleep inside. It was around 2 a.m., and Darlene was chatting with a family friend about a surprise trip they were planning. That friend had planned a Caribbean cruise but ended up offering their tickets to Todd and Darlene after having to discipline their sons. Darlene was thrilled about the upcoming October adventure. Unbeknownst to her, someone was watching her on the warm night. Suddenly, from the darkness, a figure emerged wielding a long knife. It was Adam. The killer slit the woman's throat and violently stabbed her in the left side of her chest until she died within minutes. All she could scream was, "Oh my God! Oh my God!" On the other end of the phone, her friend heard the sudden change in her voice. Although Darlene no longer responded, the call was still active. He shouted her name, hoping she would answer. Panicked, he rushed upstairs to wake his wife and told her something terrible had happened to Darlene and that he needed to go to her house immediately. Meanwhile, after the murder, Adam calmly returned to his truck, parked at a nearby stop, and drove away, leaving behind the crime scene. Chad and Patty, Darlene's friends, sped to her house. Arriving there, the place was eerily quiet and they headed to the backyard. The kitchen light shone through the sliding glass doors, and they could see Darlene's lifeless body slumped in a chair, her eyes still open and a gaping wound in her throat. Shocked, they immediately called the police. When the officers arrived, Todd was still asleep in his room. An officer yelled at him to show his hands. Todd, groggy and barely understanding what was happening, was blinded by flashlights and confronted with guns pointed at him. Nick experienced a similar rude awakening. Both men were handcuffed and taken to the kitchen. Todd kept asking what was happening and where his wife was, but the police did not answer. Then he noticed Darlene's purse on the table next to her car keys and cell phone, which made him worry. The detective eventually removed Todd's handcuffs and took him to another room, while another officer spoke with Nick in the kitchen. Todd then received the devastating news. Darlene was dead. He was heartbroken, feeling a pain like never before, as if someone had ripped his heart out. The whole Ewalt family was in shock. Meanwhile, Adam continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Later that morning, he picked up a load from a company as scheduled to continue with his work. Hours later, the detectives interrogated Todd at the station. He struggled to explain how he hadn't heard anything. However, the detectives were not satisfied with his testimony and considered him the prime suspect in his wife's death. The next day, they brought him back to the station for further questioning. They asked about sensitive points in their marriage and accused him of killing her over financial troubles based on their reviewed finances. Todd insisted he had a good job and savings and had no reason to murder his wife. The police then suggested that she wanted to separate from him, which led to her death. Todd maintained his innocence and even took a lie detector test, which the police said he failed. Confused and desperate, he then sought a lawyer. The family was left completely devastated by the crime. Since the incident, Nicole, the 21-year-old daughter, refused to go out alone at night. Her brother Nick relived the tragic memory of their mother's death, often lying awake at night. Todd said the murder destroyed his life and wished he could have been there to save her. Darlene was the first, but sadly not the last victim of the so-called highway killer. On the night of July 17, 2007, in Conewago Township, rural York County, Pennsylvania, a woman named Patricia Brooks was sleeping on her couch when Adam burst into her home. The house was close to Interstate 76 and about 25 miles south of where he committed his first murder. Adam stabbed Patricia in the neck and shoulder with a huge knife. She woke up to indescribable pain, immediately covering the wound with her hands and screaming. Adam then fled through the back door he had entered minutes before, allowing Patricia to survive the attack, although she could not make out any features of the man dressed in black who had attacked her. Monica loved her new home, located in Bloomsbury, New Jersey. Everyone there was friendly, and she felt that nothing bad could happen. She felt so secure that she never locked her doors. Monica had great friends with whom she spent hours talking online. She also had other big passions: photography, motorcycles, and rock and roll. Without any ties, she lived life to the fullest, attending concerts and traveling, embracing each day as if it were her last. On the night of July 28, 2007, Monica was sleeping in her bed when, around midnight, Adam parked his truck at a nearby stop. Dressed in black and carrying a knife, he hid in the shadows, silently moving through the picturesque streets in the dead of night, searching for unlocked doors. Finding Monica's front door open, he quietly stepped inside. He moved through the house noiselessly until he reached the bedroom on the first floor. Startled awake, Monica turned on the light, and that's when he attacked her with the knife. He fatally stabbed her in the throat. She bled out and died quickly, but not before struggling against her assailant. Adam stabbed her multiple times in the neck and chest. Monica died alone at the hands of that monster, without time to call for help or escape. She was cornered with nowhere to go. The crime shocked the peaceful community. Initially, detectives focused on people Monica might have been romantically involved with, as it seemed like a crime of passion. However, they found no solid leads. The police had no suspects until they noticed something significant. Monica lived near the truck stop and the interstate. They decided to contact the FBI, which had begun to systematize investigations of similar crimes occurring along interstate highways across the country. The federal agency suspected there might be one or several serial killers, possibly a trucker who used the highways to randomly select his victims, stalk them, kill them, and then escape. Less than 24 hours after Monica's murder, a new chapter of horror unfolded in Chelmsford, a town in Massachusetts. Adam continued his route northward, parking his truck at a rest area. Around 11 p.m. on July 29, 2007, in an apartment complex, a woman spotted a man hiding in the bushes and called the police. By the time the officers arrived, the man had vanished, but a few hours later, security agents received a frantic call through the 911 emergency service. A man was trying to enter the home of a woman located in a mobile home park. She reported that her daughter thought she saw someone staring at their house, so she went outside to check. There, she encountered an individual dressed all in black, wearing a mask, looking like a ninja. The man turned around, followed her, and banged on the door. She was terrified. The police arrived within minutes, but once again, the suspect had vanished. 90 minutes later, around 4:30 a.m., Adam showed up at the home of Kevin and Jeannie McDonough, located about 2 miles from the trailer park and just off the highway. Kevin, a 49-year-old utility line contractor, and his wife, a 47-year-old administrative clerk, lived in a 4-bedroom house in Chelmsford, a town named one of the best places to live in the United States in 2007. Their 2 children, Shay, 15, and Ryan, 19, also lived in the house. Adam tried the back door and found it unlocked. Shay had left it unlocked around midnight because she thought her brother was still out, not knowing that Ryan had stayed at a friend's house that night. So, Adam entered the house without any trouble. The family's dog, a black Labrador mix named Bosco, was outside and never barked, later leading to suspicions that he might have been drugged by the intruder. That warm night, everyone in the town was asleep. Shay had moved to the guest room because it had air conditioning and was right next to her parents' room, making it cooler to sleep. Suddenly, she felt a huge hand covering her mouth and nose. It was Adam, wearing a mask with openings for the eyes and mouth. In his other hand, he held a huge hunting knife. She couldn't breathe and couldn't see well in the dark room. At first, she thought it was her brother who had come home late, but then she heard a stranger's voice threatening to kill her and making some noise. Adam pulled down the sheets that covered her, and that's when she panicked. She, a swimmer with strong legs, began kicking vigorously against the wall adjoining her parents' room. What happened next, in moments of desperation in the quiet Massachusetts neighborhood, was both a complete nightmare and an incredible story of heroism. She's frantic kicks and a muffled groan woke her parents, who thought she was having a nightmare. But when they entered the room, they saw the huge intruder, initially just a large black silhouette to them. Adam, who was 5.9 feet tall and weighed 245 pounds, was confronted by Kevin, who weighed 160 kilograms and was 5.6 feet tall. Kevin lunged at the intruder, grabbing his wrists, throwing him to the ground and pinning him down. He shouted, demanding to know who he was, while Jeannie tried to wrestle the knife away. Suddenly, Adam burst with adrenaline and stood up with Kevin on his back. Kevin held on and wrapped his arm around Adam's neck. Then, Both men crashed against a wall. With his back against the wall, Kevin squeezed the criminal's trachea as hard as he could. Meanwhile, Jeannie managed to take the knife away but severely cut both her hands in the process. By then, Shay had run out and was calling 911 on her cell phone. She told the operator that a tall, burly man had entered her room and threatened her life, and that her parents had caught him. Jeannie and Kevin fought hard to defend themselves, struggling for their lives while waiting for the police. Sometimes, people freeze in situations like these, but the McDonoughs undoubtedly summoned incredible strength and managed to subdue Adam, who was much larger than them, even wresting the knife from him. The officers arrived at the house in 4 minutes and saw Adam subdued by the family. Kevin had applied a powerful headlock that immobilized him. One of the officers warned the intruder not to move or he'd shoot him in the head, while Kevin calmly brushed himself off and asked the police to remove that scum from his home. As the police patted him down, they found evidence that alarmed them. A couple of knives, larger military-style household knives, and a belt from which sheaths for the blades hung. They also discovered a flashlight used for strangling, a ninja star, a hood, and a terrifying leather mask with cutout eyes and mouth. Meanwhile, in Adam's truck, they found what appeared to be trophies or souvenirs from previous victims and several DVDs, including one from the movie Hunting Humans. After the incident, life slowly returned to normal for the family. Shay started seeing a therapist to help manage the terror she sometimes felt, but she still had problems sleeping alone. In fact, their dog Bosco began to sleep by her side every night. Whenever she saw a shadow, Shay would still get up, but she was grateful to be alive and often remembered how her parents fought for her. They didn't consider themselves superheroes, just parents who acted instinctively to protect their daughter. The FBI was handling a database of about 80,000 unresolved violent crimes across the United States. They had started gathering information on serial killings and assaults near major highways. By 2007, they had recorded more than 500 murders with similar characteristics over the past 30 years, but they were concerned there might be more hidden cases. Approximately 200 suspects had been identified, most of them truckers. With their investigations, the FBI had helped state police with baffling crimes that remained unsolved, and also connected cases that were sometimes half a country apart. Often, suspects use distance as a smokescreen to cover their tracks. When they dispose of a body and move 2 or 3 states away, they know it will be difficult to be identified. The first thing the FBI does when it receives a case is to look for specific characteristics they can investigate. For example, if someone is strangled, the search focuses on all strangling cases. After receiving calls from the police in Massachusetts and New Jersey about unresolved stabbing cases, an FBI analyst determined they were very similar and not far from major highways. This prompted them to put officers from both states in contact. Soon they began linking Adam to his other crimes. Investigators learned that the criminal had been in Bloomsbury the night Monica Massaro died, at a truck stop less than a mile from her house. A receipt found in his truck led them to that lead. In August 2007, a New Jersey police investigator decided to go to Massachusetts to question Adam about Monica's murder. For over an hour, the detective conversed amiably with Adam, just trying to gain his trust. Then, he directly asked if Adam had attacked anyone in New Jersey. Adam then asked if there was the death penalty in that state. The detective replied that no one had been executed there for years. Adam smirked and said, "That's why I haven't done anything there. What I've done is what I've done, and I haven't done anything wrong." Then Adam confessed to killing Monica and described the crime in detail.
She sit straight up and got out of bed when she seen me and started screaming, and I tried to get her to be quiet. I had the knife, it was on the bed. about that long, and she rolled against it and cut right here, best I could tell. And I'm no medic. It cut this jugular vein right here.
How far across?
Okay.
Showing no remorse and exhibiting great cruelty. Initially, Adam claimed he was just a struggling trucker trying to make ends meet for his family of 5. He said he had been sidelined by a back injury, which affected his finances and required him to take medication for various ailments, including hallucinations and diabetes. He claimed his original plan was only to steal some money. He tried to justify his actions by saying he had lost everything, including his family. At the same time, he insisted that he respected the law and treated people the way he liked to be treated. He claimed that when he entered Monica's house and found her asleep, he covered her mouth, but she resisted, and in the struggle, she accidentally rolled onto the knife and bled to death. He then claimed he tried to cover up the crime by stabbing her multiple times to make it look like a sexual crime. The detectives found his version of accidental death hard to believe. Adam insisted that he didn't intend to kill her and that he used his knives as intimidation tactics in case he was discovered. He also denied deriving any sexual pleasure from the murders. Almost a month after his arrest in Massachusetts, Adam was charged with Monica's murder. In most of the cases, DNA has become one of the most accurate tools for individual identification, used by thousands of labs. It's employed first for the identification of biological traces of interest in criminal investigations of various crimes, second in the identification of human remains and missing persons, and third for biological research on paternity and other kinship relations. In Adam's case, DNA was also essential in linking him to his crimes. Weeks after the interrogation where he confessed to killing Monica, investigators received the analysis of the knives recovered in Massachusetts. One of them had blood on it. DNA analysis proved it was Monica's, as well as a necklace found among Adam's possessions in his truck. The man had also discarded some gloves as he ran from Patricia's house. Further analysis revealed the gloves had DNA from both Adam and Monica. Forensic scientists found blood samples on it that turned out to be from Darlene and Patricia, the first 2 women he attacked. Legal proceedings against the highway killer then began. In December 2007, Adam was sentenced to 25 to 30 years after pleading guilty to the attempted murder of Shay. He pleaded guilty to 9 of the 10 charges he faced, which included breaking and entering, armed assault in a dwelling, assault with intent to murder, and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. He only denied the charge of attempting to rape a minor. When the judge asked him if he had done all that the McDonough family accused him of, the burly, bearded man, his arms chained to his waist, simply said, "Almost everything." Shay, who was 16 at the time, did not appear in court on the day of the sentencing, but her parents did. Jeannie, her mother, told Adam that one day he would have to answer for his actions, not just in a court of law. Adam's next trial was in October 2008 in New Jersey, where he pleaded guilty to Monica's murder and was sentenced to 50 years. Finally, in June 2010 in Pennsylvania, Adam pleaded guilty to 2 other crimes to avoid the death penalty. He was then sentenced to between 10 and 20 years for the attempted murder of Patricia and received a life sentence for the murder of Darlene. Members of Darlene's family addressed the judge before the sentencing, expressing a mix of sadness and anger. Todd, Darlene's husband, said what happened was the result of a senseless and unnecessary act by a coward. Adam, wearing the orange and white prison uniform, had his hands shackled. He looked different from the man who had been arrested. He had lost a considerable amount of weight and had his hair and beard cut short. He showed no emotion when he received his sentence and declined his right to speak because he had nothing to say, as he pointed out during the trial. Meanwhile, Nick, Darlene's 25-year-old son at the time of the trial, asked the judge to review the investigation and sentence his mother's killer to death. He told reporters outside the courthouse that he wished to see him dead, but the prosecution had decided not to seek the death penalty as such executions are rare in Pennsylvania. Adam Leroy is serving his sentences at a maximum security prison with 2,000 beds. Authorities have speculated whether Adam was involved in other murders, given the extensive routes truckers take, but this has not been proven. Even the criminal himself has refused to comment to the police on this speculation. One such case occurred in the town where Adam lived and relates to the murder of a police officer who was shot 7 times in October 1996, and his body was found in his patrol car after he had pulled over a truck reported as stolen. Although the modus operandi in this case is substantially different from Adam's, a composite sketch of the suspect created with the help of witnesses resembles the highway killer. In 2011, Jeannie McDonough published a book recounting how a normal family ended the criminal crusade of a serial killer. It started as a personal diary with which the woman tried to make sense of the whirlwind of emotions she felt after saving her daughter from the monster Adam, and the guilt and sadness she experienced for the other victims of the man. She then began to learn more about the women who fell victim to the criminal. She attended several trials in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and started exchanging letters with relatives and friends of the victims. All of this is detailed in the book. Over time, Shay moved in with some friends and began working as a nanny, and her parents had to fight against the sense of overprotection towards their daughter. They also installed a powerful home security system. The case of Adam brings us back to motiveless killers. He was perhaps an aggressive man, but with no criminal record, who suddenly at the age of 43 embarked on a 17-day murder spree, committing crimes against 4 women who had no connection to each other or to him. They simply lived in houses near a major road and had the misfortune of leaving their doors unlocked. The highways became the hunting ground for this man, who chose his victims randomly, only focusing on those who could not defend themselves or pose a threat to him. This concludes today's Unreal True Crime episode. Again, I remind you to subscribe and leave a like to let me know you appreciate my work. Good night, until next time. Good afternoon, dear audience. As you know, here at Unreal True Crime, we release videos every other day. Many of you have reached out expressing a desire for daily content, so we've launched a new channel also focused on real-life crime stories called The Crime Storyteller. On the days we don't post videos on Unreal True Crime, we'll upload them there. This means if you're looking for daily doses of the most astonishing real-life crime cases, don't hesitate to subscribe. Without further ado, let's dive into today's case. Erin was born on July 15, 1994, in the United States to unknown parents. Fortunately, she was adopted by Lore and William, a couple from Tennessee. They had 7 children in total, with 5 of them being adopted, including Erin. For Lore and William, adopting was more than a decision. It was about following a divine command to help those in need, especially since some of their adopted children had special needs. For instance, their youngest, Trisha, was born with multiple birth defects. From early childhood, while growing up in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, Erin showed a remarkable and unconditional love for animals. Her mother cherished memories of Erin being the only one who could make a rabbit walk on a leash as if it were a dog. Kind-hearted and gentle, Erin enjoyed the benefits of having a loving and united family, facing only the usual challenges of any average household. When Tricia passed away at just 3.5 years old, Lore and William helped their grieving children understand the importance of having provided a happy life for her. Over time, Erin turned her affinity for animals into a special talent for taming horses that no one else could tame. She had a pony named Riley at a stable near her home. In 5th grade, she met Jonathan Corwin, a boy a year older than her. Initially, they were not particularly close, but about 5 years later, they started chatting on social media. By then, Erin's protective nature had led her to become the mother of dozens of animals, ranging from fish and guinea pigs to dogs and cats, all of whom she welcomed and cared for. Eventually, Jonathan plucked up the courage to ask her out, choosing her 16th birthday for the date. With her parents' permission, their love blossomed. Their romance, full of poem exchanges and shared dreams, turned them into the quintessential American couple. After finishing high school, Erin found employment at a local tractor supply company, spending her free time with her horse or scouring garage sales with her mother and siblings. Meanwhile, Jonathan joined the Marine Infantry, and without hesitation about their bright future, they married in Las Vegas in November 2012. The following year, Jonathan learned he would be transferred to California. While the prospect excited both him and Erin, they planned to return to East Tennessee as soon as possible. In September 2013, the newlyweds moved to their new home at the Marine base in San Bernardino County. In turn, the location served as one of the entry points to Joshua Tree National Park. Here, they met new people, such as the couple Connor and Aisling Maliki, who lived with their young son Brian on the ground floor of the same block as Erin and her husband. Amid daily tasks, Jonathan also struck up a friendship with another colleague, Christopher Brandon Lee. Son of Karen Lee and hailing from Anchorage, Alaska, Christopher was a Marine who had been going through tough times after returning from a tour in Afghanistan. He lived on the base with his wife Nicole and their 6-year-old daughter Liberty. Like Erin, the couple shared a love for horses. Soon, the three couples became friends. While their husbands were on duty, Erin, Aisling, and Nicole would visit each other to have lunch and chat. When Jonathan, Connor, and Christopher were at home, they would cook or watch movies and TV shows in any of their apartments. It seemed like each home was everyone's home. Additionally, Christopher and his wife Nicole became horse sponsors at the Roca Blanca Ranch, which also hosted a non-profit organization dedicated to animal care and protection. Isabel Megley owned the site. Naturally, upon learning about it, Erin joined the initiative. Amid their military duties, everything seemed to go smoothly. Initially, Christopher seemed to fit well with the uniform, but over time, other Marines noticed he often displayed a mix of disorder and insolence in handling weapons. An officer later reprimanded him for treating rifles and rocket launchers as if they were toys, earning Christopher a reputation for being reckless. For the Corwins, everyday life, far from their respective families, presented challenges that strained their relationship beyond the honeymoon phase. Their youth also meant they were not fully prepared for the challenges of marriage, often arguing over money and accusing each other of overspending. However, when Erin became pregnant, all disagreements and bitterness between her and Jonathan dissolved. She was so happy with the news that she announced it with a blue and pink post on her social media profile. Unfortunately, just a few weeks later, Erin suffered a miscarriage, which devastated her emotionally. To make matters worse, Jonathan's frequent deployments for military exercises far from the base added physical and emotional distance, as she felt he was unable to console her. Consequently, the cracks in their marriage not only reappeared but also deepened. During the free time they shared, Christopher had been watching Erin and found it easy to discern the depth of sadness on her face. From that moment, he began spending more time with Erin without Nicole around. On a Sunday night in February 2014, the Lees joined the Corwins in their apartment. Jonathan and Nicole chose to watch a zombie series episode, but Erin, put off by the violence, declined to join. Instead of staying with his wife, Christopher went with Erin to the master bedroom to play video games. Alone, sitting side by side on the floor, they spent a few minutes in front of the screen until one of them paused the game and they looked at each other. Suddenly, they shared their first kiss. Although it lasted only a moment, that intimate gesture changed everything, and they began an affair that quickly escalated in intensity. Soon, Erin and Christopher were talking about leaving their spouses and how great a stepmother she would be to Liberty, whom she frequently cared for. Meanwhile, Nicole sensed her husband's growing distance and soon checked his cell phone, discovering the text messages between Christopher and Erin. Nicole was furious and confronted Christopher with a monologue filled with bitter words that lasted for hours. She didn't stop there, though. She also informed Jonathan about the affair, causing a heated confrontation that lasted through the night. When Erin tried to leave, Nicole, eyes blazing with rage, screamed threats at her. Erin and Christopher ended their affair, but weeks later, they resumed their secret meetings. Around this time, Christopher wrote Erin a poem, urging her not to give up. Meanwhile, unaware of the ongoing betrayal, Jonathan was determined to make his marriage work. Then, on June 22, 2014, as Erin anxiously awaited her mother's first visit to California, she discovered she was pregnant again, this time undoubtedly with Christopher's child. Though she didn't announce it on social media, she told him. Initially, Christopher feigned happiness, but in reality he was displeased, fearing the news could disrupt his plans. Despite promising a future together to Erin, Christopher had no intention of leaving his wife and was greatly fearful of Nicole's potential reaction to the pregnancy. His time in the Marines was nearing its end. On July 4, 2014, he was scheduled to finish his service and then planned to return to Alaska with his wife, leaving behind the tumultuous affair. The next day, Christopher told Isabel that he had been exploring the desert and was thrilled about the interesting things he had found, particularly excited about discovering a hard-to-reach mine shaft. He then asked to borrow a white propane tank that she owned. Isabel had no objections. Meanwhile, he started researching online how to dispose of a body. Then, he messaged Erin to invite her for a surprise romantic evening in the national park. Filled with excitement, Erin immediately texted a friend in Tennessee to share the news. They speculated about the true intentions of her lover and the mention of a surprise element. When her friend sent a text with a ring emoji, Erin admitted she was excited about the possibility of a marriage proposal. The date was set for June 28th. Christopher told his wife he had planned a coyote hunting trip in Joshua Tree National Park with Connor, which conveniently allowed him to take his Winchester .22 caliber rifle. Early that day, he also loaded up the propane tank and gasoline. Before leaving, he mentioned to Nicole that Connor had canceled so he would go alone. Around 7:30 that morning, Erin told Jonathan she was heading to Joshua Tree National Park to explore the trails that she and her mother could later bike on. She kissed him goodbye and said she loved him, leading her husband to believe that their life was returning to normal. Once at the meeting point, Aaron faced a harsh disillusionment. Not only was there no dream marriage proposal, but Christopher also made it clear that he had no affection for her whatsoever. She was confronted with a man consumed by anger, with her as the target of his rage. What happened next is largely known only to him, but it is known that he fired shots into the air before using a rope tied to 2 reinforcement bars to strangle Erin, cutting off her air supply. After she fell to the ground, he checked her vital signs and, ensuring she was not breathing, threw her into the mine shaft he had discovered days earlier. Erin fell 76 meters deep. As hours passed with no news from his wife, Jonathan became anxious. He tried calling her at least 50 times and eventually reported her missing the next morning. When the young soldier also contacted his mother-in-law, she suspected that her daughter, who always had trouble with directions, might have gotten lost in the vast national park. Several days passed with no information about Erin's whereabouts. When new information finally emerged, it was far from reassuring. A woman living in a remote area noticed that a car had been parked near her house for several days, which was very unusual. She took pictures of the car and shared them, hoping the owner would appear. These photos turned out to be crucial, as it was discovered that the car belonged to Erin. When the police informed Erin's family that they had found her car abandoned several kilometers north of the park, she felt a stab in her heart. To her, it was almost a certain sign that her daughter had encountered something sinister. The police shared a similar sentiment. From that point, the authorities had 2 tasks, one more challenging than the other. The first task was to gather evidence to prosecute a potential attacker. In this regard, San Bernardino's detectives began to delve into Erin's life and soon uncovered hidden aspects that might have endangered her. It was through their investigations that Jonathan learned his wife's affair had continued in secret. This detail quickly led the police to rule out the husband as a suspect. Instead, Christopher became the focus of their investigation, especially after tire tracks found near Erin's car seemed to match his vehicle. Consequently, on July 1, 2014, Christopher was interviewed by the police. By then, he had hidden his rifle at Isabel's ranch. Christopher initially apologized for not disclosing his relationship with Erin, claiming their interactions had never crossed the boundaries set by their respective marriages. Then, unexpectedly, he claimed that Erin had confided in him about being a victim of domestic abuse. Regarding the Saturday she disappeared, he admitted being in the national park area alone, ostensibly to hunt coyotes, hence firing his gun at rocks. However, the police confronted him with the evidence, leading Christopher to change his story. Without a body, the investigators could not pressure him further. At that point, there was no way to prove Erin was deceased. So after 9 hours lacking sufficient evidence to charge him, the authorities had to let Christopher go. The police were convinced that the story provided by the main suspect was highly unusual and implausible. Later, when the detectives spoke with Nicole, they noted her uncooperative attitude, almost as if she resented the investigation. Christopher was eventually discharged from the Marine Corps, and as planned, he and his wife packed their bags, loaded their truck, and, along with Little Liberty, headed back to Alaska. Meanwhile, the police's second and more daunting task was to locate Erin's remains and prove that this was not a mere case of spontaneous disappearance. The investigation seemed to stall, and the detectives were frustrated. Until Isabel remembered that the week before Erin's disappearance, Christopher had mentioned going to the national park with a friend to explore mines, referencing one that nobody would find. Determined to follow this lead, they sought the help of a local expert, skilled and familiar with the scattered mines across the terrain. Guided by this expert, the investigators and volunteers in California began a meticulous search for Erin in the park. They covered 3,000 square kilometers of wilderness, with 6 different law enforcement agencies eventually getting involved. However, after several weeks of searching, there were no favorable results, leading to the difficult decision to end the operation on Saturday, August 16, 2014. Yet, in a surprising twist of fate on that day, a spelunker noticed a strong smell of gasoline coming from one of the mines. In the final hours of that day, volunteers lowered a bucket with a camera into the mine. At 9 meters down, the oxygen level in the pit was toxic, and further down, near 30 meters, they discovered what appeared to be a body. After a tremendous effort in the late hours of that Saturday in August, the body was retrieved, 2 months after Aaron's disappearance. A propane tank was also found at the bottom of the mine, believed to be part of a failed attempt to destroy the victim's body. The remains were airlifted to the local morgue, where, due to advanced decomposition, dental records were used for identification. It was confirmed to be Aaron, who had died from asphyxiation caused by an object still clutched around her neck. Additionally, it was revealed that she was pregnant. The shocking discovery that Aaron and her unborn child had been killed sent her family on an emotional roller coaster. Though it was the worst possible news, for her mother at least, it was more bearable than the ongoing uncertainty of not knowing her whereabouts. For now, her mother only hoped that her daughter's body would be returned to Tennessee for a proper burial. With Christopher having the motive, means, and opportunity and evidence piling up against him, he was soon arrested by a police officer in Anchorage, and his vehicle was confiscated. Inside the car, beneath the passenger seat, authorities found a homemade object similar to the one found around Aaron's neck. This led the police to interview Christopher's mother. Although she knew nothing about the item and claimed never to have seen it, a search of her home later uncovered a magazine edition featuring an article on Aaron's case. Following Christopher's arrest, the case attracted national media attention. Shortly after, the San Bernardino's police held a press conference to provide details on the case. They mentioned that Christopher was the main suspect in the crime. They also searched Isabel's ranch to her utter astonishment, where they found and seized a rifle owned by Christopher. Further complicating his situation, investigators discovered incriminating search histories on his internet activity. Consequently, Christopher was charged with first-degree murder. On Friday, September 19, 2014, hundreds of candles flickered in silent memory and tribute to Aaron and the unborn child whose life was cut short. Approximately 250 people attended the vigil, many wearing special T-shirts with Aaron's name on the front and a Bible verse on the back. During this time, Jonathan agreed to speak with only one media outlet among the many seeking his comment. In an interview, he expressed his hatred for Christopher's actions, but stated he felt that harboring hatred every time he saw him would eventually consume him. Jonathan revealed that he had learned about the rekindled affair and that his wife disappeared when she went to see Christopher, who was still his next-door neighbor. Part of him wanted to confront Christopher violently, but he refrained, believing it would make him no better than Christopher. Jonathan did not want to be a bad person. The legal process for obtaining justice for Aaron Corwin began 2 years later in October 2016. From the outset of the trial against Christopher, the prosecution easily established his penchant for violence and his motive and opportunity to commit the crime. On Wednesday, October 19th, a forensic scientist testified that a .22 caliber bullet casing was found near the mine where Aaron's body was discovered, and the firing pin marks on the casing matched Christopher's gun. When it was the defense's turn, Christopher was presented as the sole witness. He took the stand and, despite confirming all evidence against him, confessed to killing Aaron. However, he then offered a narrative of the events that was clearly not only false but also desperate. He claimed he had suspected that Aaron had abused his daughter while caring for her, leading to a so-called revelation on that fateful Saturday in the desert. In light of his narrative, Christopher believed he had ample justification for his actions, clearly hoping that his macabre story would result in a lesser sentence. Throughout the trial, he maintained a demeanor of cooperation and calmness. However, the jury did not believe a single word of his account. After just 15 minutes of deliberation, Christopher Brandon Lee was found guilty of first-degree murder. The following month, he was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. In response to the tragedy, Aaron's family and some civic groups advocated for a petition to the Bureau of Land Management, urging them to provide funding and resources to seal abandoned vertical mine shafts, starting with the one where Aaron Corwin perished. Recognizing the enormity of the task and acknowledging that some public areas had already been closed, they requested prioritization for this particular area to prevent similar tragedies from affecting other families. Reflecting on the entire ordeal and the relief of reaching a conclusive verdict, Aaron's mother admitted feeling emotionally and physically drained by the end of the sentencing hearing. She had been carrying the weight of the world on her shoulders for over 2 years, with her grief so heavy that she could barely walk. Yet, following the verdict and sentencing, she felt an immense burden lifted off her shoulders, likening her emotional response to the day she finally adopted Aaron. She described years of uncertainty in the adoption process and how all the stress vanished the moment she gave Aaron her last name, mirroring her relief upon hearing Christopher's sentence. As for Jonathan Corwin, Aaron's husband, he chose to shield himself from media overexposure and was taking steps to rebuild his life after the tragic loss. With that, we conclude today's story. Remember to subscribe and like if you appreciate this work. Good night, and see you in the next episode of Unreal True Crime. Raheem Taylor, 58 years old, was the 5th execution of 2023, following a previous execution in Missouri, 2 in Texas, and 1 in Oklahoma. All were by lethal injection. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement stopped. In a final statement, Taylor said, "Muslims don't die, but live eternally in the hearts of our family and friends. Death is not your enemy. It is your destiny. Look forward to meeting it. Peace." Leonard Taylor was born in the United States in the mid-1960s. He was the son of Jesse, who also had another son identified as Perry Taylor. In the late 1980s, Leonard met a girl named Mia Perry, with whom he became romantically involved. Around this time, Leonard began to accumulate a criminal record. Initially, he was convicted on charges related to narcotics and concealed weapons in San Bernardino County and spent time behind bars, though the length of his sentence remains unclear. In September 1990, a 19-year-old man was fatally attacked following an argument in an apartment complex located in the same county. By then, Leonard, who had been released, was living in that area. Due to his criminal record, he became one of the primary suspects in the case, but managed to avoid any responsibility. As part of his scheme to evade justice, he used a false name, Michael Chambers. The following year, in 1991, Mia became pregnant. The news of his first child did not motivate Leonard to change his ways. During this time, he was arrested by the Drug Enforcement Administration and convicted for transporting and selling narcotics, leading to his incarceration in a federal prison. Since his daughter was born amid these circumstances, he was unable to be present with Mia during the birth. Facing reality, Mia named the baby on her own and prepared to raise her child independently. Soon after, what people thought became true. Leonard's connection seemed less likely with his newborn when, in 1992, he was found guilty of statutory rape and child abuse in San Diego County. While in prison, he disclosed to a local media outlet that he maintained connections with some scammers involved in irregularities related to corporate check frauds. Upon his release, Leonard embarked on a short-lived career in white-collar crime, which quickly returned him to jail, this time in the Missouri State Prison. The San Bernardino police arrested him again in 1999 for failing to register as a sex offender. Shortly after the beginning of the 2000s, Leonard was accused again, this time for intimate coercion against a minor. Aside from his illicit businesses, which required him to travel across the country, he maintained relationships and intimacy with multiple women simultaneously, earning him the nickname CAs, short for Casanova. Another standout trait of his criminal behavior was making and using fake IDs and different names, ending up with almost 20 of them at some unknown time. Leonard married a woman living in California who also had an outstanding arrest warrant for a probation violation. It was during this time, under unspecified circumstances, that Leonard met Angela Rowe. Their first encounter took place in the city of Jennings, in St. Louis County, Missouri. Angela was born around 1976. She had previously been in a romantic relationship with a man with whom she had other children, Alexis Conley, Acrea Conley, and Tyrese Conley. Despite being married and also being involved with another woman in Kentucky, Leonard began a relationship with Angela. After a rather brief period, he moved into her house located in the suburbs of St. Louis. Angela's home was well known among the neighbors for the constant joy radiated by her 3 young residents. From then on, Angela's house and her children also became the love nest for the new couple. By the end of 2004, Leonard and Angela had been living together for approximately a year, and according to her family and friends, their cohabitation was not without its challenges and difficulties. On Saturday, November 20th, 2004, a friend called Angela and asked to borrow $50. At that time of year, the traditional holiday season was approaching. Being a mother of 3 children, Christmas was particularly important. Therefore, Angela later took the time to decorate the house with her children, hanging large and striking candy canes at the entrance and placing lights to add to the festivity. That weekend, the kids went to celebrate Thanksgiving early with Tyrone, their father, and his side of the family. Meanwhile, on Sunday, November 21st, Angela did not show up for her weekend shift as a housekeeper, but called to inform she would not be able to come. The following day, a friend called her, and they chatted as usual. The children returned to their mother's house and were seen by some neighbors in the following days. From that weekend in November 2004, several significant events occurred, yet the how and when of the detailed events were something the authorities could never fully reconstruct. However, everything points to an argument between Leonard and Angela, during which she threatened him with a knife. He then overpowered her and shot her. In a turn of events, realizing that the kids had witnessed everything, Leonard took the lives of all 3 children. Afterwards, he turned off the heating and instead turned on the central air conditioning of the house. According to phone records, on November 23, 2004 at 11:24 p.m., Leonard called his brother Perry to ask for money. It is believed that during their conversation, he confessed to what had happened, adding that things had gotten out of control and that it wasn't what he wanted, but it happened. On the same day, Angela's friend called the house phone repeatedly without getting an answer. A few hours later, at 12:05 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th, she tried again without success. Between that day and the next, Perry told his girlfriend about what Leonard had done. On Thursday, November 25th, while most American households were finalizing details to celebrate Thanksgiving, Perry went to his girlfriend's house. There, his brother contacted him again. After the conversation, Perry told the girl that Leonard was still in Angela's house, waiting for a letter from California. There were 3 more calls in the following hours, one of which was specifically made from the landline of Angela's house. It was during one of these conversations that Perry's girlfriend heard him ask Leonard how he was still there, specifically alluding to the presence of the bodies. What Leonard's response was remains unknown. Then, a plane ticket from St. Louis to California was booked, with the transaction being made from a phone number with a California area code. Early in the morning of Friday, November 26th, Leonard went to his sister-in-law's house so she could take him to the airport. He had plane tickets from St. Louis to Ontario, California, via Phoenix, Arizona. The ticket was in the name of Louis Bradley, an alias that Leonard used and for which he had a Missouri ID that included his photo. He took the opportunity of being at his sister-in-law's house to leave a box that was to be delivered to his brother. Shortly after, according to some witnesses, he was seen disposing of a gun in a sewer near Perry's girlfriend's house, but the weapon was never recovered. On the way to the airport, Leonard told his sister-in-law that this would probably be the last time she would see him alive. Then, to elaborate on this strange notion, he added that some people were trying to kill him and that she should not pay attention to things she might hear about him. Cameras recorded Leonard that Friday morning passing through the security area at St. Louis International Airport. He was wearing dark pants, a pink shirt, and a cream-colored hat, carrying 2 black bags. Shortly after, he headed to Gate 16 to catch the 8:10 Southwest Airlines flight to Ontario. Meanwhile, Angela's friend continued calling throughout those days until November 27th, never receiving a response. On the other side of the country, between Saturday and Sunday, Leonard finally met up with his wife. During this time, Angela's absence was noted by her co-workers, but unlike previous occasions, there was no call from her to report anything. Leonard stayed in San Bernardino County for 4 days before driving across the country with a friend. He traveled through Texas, Louisiana, and Georgia, ending up in a house in Kentucky. For the week of November 29th, when classes resumed after the Thanksgiving holiday, the absence of Angela's kids at school did not go unnoticed. Then, with considerable concern over Angela's prolonged silence, her family asked the police to check on the woman and her 3 children. Thus, on December 3, 2004, police officers were sent to the small brick house in the suburbs of St. Louis. Once on site, the officers found several significant details, including that the front door was locked, newspapers were piled up in the front yard, and mail overflowed the mailbox. The team managed to enter through a bedroom window. The air conditioning was running at full power outside while the television was on. The next thing the agents had to face was far from an idyllic home scene. Wrapped in blankets, Angela was found lifeless, likely from gunshot wounds. Her 3 young children also appeared to have suffered fatal gunshot wounds, and their bodies were aligned on a bed in the early stages of decomposition. The coroner found out that the victims had passed away 2 or 3 days before their bodies got stiff. Meanwhile, during subsequent thorough investigations at the residence, investigators found 2 non-functional cell phones, and there was no evidence that Angela had any other cell phone in use besides her own. As often happens in such cases, Leonard was immediately considered the main suspect. This was initially due to his relationship with Angela, but it is fair to say that his extensive criminal history also raised suspicions. As the police tracked his whereabouts, Perry was interrogated about the accusations against his brother on December 8, 2004. During that interview, Perry told detectives that Leonard had called him and admitted to his actions. After an intense nationwide chase, police monitored a house in Madisonville, Kentucky, where Leonard was staying. On December 9th, Leonard tried to flee by hiding on the floor of a vehicle and was arrested on the spot, holding a knife in his hand and moving under the alias of Jason. Beyond that, he made no moves nor uttered any comments. The sunglasses Leonard wore at the time of his arrest, along with a few other belongings, were taken as evidence, although nothing seemed to suggest that these objects could provide any clues. Later, the police made some statements about the arrest. According to the detective in charge, Leonard's wife was not much help in the investigation. Authorities believed Leonard had turned to her for money to facilitate his escape. While the only suspect was finally in custody, the funeral services for Angela and her kids were held in Missouri. Standing beside his oldest daughter's coffin, Tyrone could not help but break down. Leonard maintained his innocence throughout, and indeed, his defense focused on the fact that he was in California when the bodies were discovered. His case was also based on the probable date of death stated by the coroner. However, the suspicions for the 4 deaths were only part of his legal troubles. Thus, while awaiting the resolution of the case, in April 2005, Leonard began serving a 100-year sentence for an unrelated conviction. 5 months later, he filed a request for the state to notify him if there was any intention to use DNA evidence in the case involving Angela and her 3 children, and if so, what type it would be, and whether physical evidence had been presented for analysis or examination. On May 25, 2006, Leonard filed a motion requesting the return of his personal belongings, including the sunglasses he wore when arrested. But in August 2006, the state took possession of the glasses and other evidence that were in police custody, and 3 months later, in November, all items were taken to the forensic lab for analysis. There, experts conducted a specialized test, which is used to determine the possible presence of blood. The procedure yielded a positive result for the presence of blood on the nose pad of the sunglasses, but there was a complication since the sample was very small. For this reason, a second confirmation test to detect the presence of DNA was not performed. Between the end of that year and the beginning of 2007, the stain was subjected to DNA testing, but due to its size, the professional in charge could not obtain a complete genetic profile. What was obtained from the partial genetic profile excluded Angela's children. However, the presence of her DNA could not be ruled out from the study. Specifically, the result had a probability of matching 1 in every 12,300 people belonging to the African American population. In May 2007, Leonard filed a motion to exclude the results of these tests as evidence in the trial. A hearing was held where the state explained that the reports were disclosed as soon as they were received, and that, contrary to what Leonard suggested, the evidence was not deliberately hidden. Ultimately, the trial court rejected his request. In January 2008, Leonard again insisted on the same point by filing a new motion to exclude any evidence related to the specialized test. Another hearing took place, and the court overruled Leonard's objection, thus admitting the validity of the results as evidence of the presumed presence of blood. During the trial that year, Leonard objected to the admission of this evidence but again faced a setback when the trial court dismissed his objections. However, the forensic scientist who conducted the tests testified that the test is presumptive because it can also yield a positive reaction to substances like potatoes, rust, bleach, and nickel. He also emphasized that since there was no confirmatory examination, the substance on the glasses was only possibly blood. Leonard did not testify at his trial. However, the coroner did testify, and his testimony marked a significant turn in the case, as he stated that the deaths could have occurred 2 or 3 weeks before the officers visited the house. This detail firmly placed the incident before Leonard's departure to California. He also explained that he had not initially considered the detail that the air conditioning thermostat was set to the maximum cold setting. When the state called Perry as a witness, the case seemed to turn again, especially when asked about his statement during the police interrogation, where he said that Leonard had confessed to the acts. He said he did not remember anything that happened and went even further to claim that his statements to the police had been the result of coercion by the authorities. After hearing from the various witnesses, it was time for the closing arguments. The state, represented by the prosecution, emphasized that the blood sample found on the man's sunglasses was indeed Angela's. In this sense, it was recalled that scientific evidence does not need to be conclusive to be admissible. Indeed, while some states require it to be so, other states have held that presumptive blood tests are admissible as long as they are accurately described, achieving their purpose of being useful to the jury. After deliberating for 4.5 hours, the jury found Leonard Taylor guilty of 4 counts of first-degree murder and 4 counts of armed criminal action. But there is something particular about his sentencing. Although it has not been possible to determine when and how, it seems that during his time in prison, Leonard converted to Islam, even changing his name to Rahim. Thus, during the sentencing hearing, also known as the penalty phase, he prohibited his defense team from presenting witnesses. Instead, he stated he was Muslim and expressed to the judge that Allah, not the court, would determine his fate. The state presented evidence, including Leonard's previous convictions. Testimony was also offered from a victim who was forced by Leonard to have intimacy and 3 members of Angela's family. The jury found 5 aggravating factors for each victim, among them mental provocation, which made the acts considered outrageously vile, horrendous, and inhumane, thereby exhibiting cruelty and disdain for the sanctity of all human life. Consequently, Leonard was sentenced to capital punishment. The execution by lethal injection was scheduled for February 7, 2023, at a Missouri prison. The case attracted the attention of several groups dedicated to defending Leonard's innocence and, therefore, demanding a review and commutation of the sentence. However, the man's claims of innocence were rejected time and again. In response to some of the appeals, the Missouri Attorney General's office stated that the case against him was solid. Perry, Leonard's brother, died in 2015. In January 2023, as the execution date loomed, Leonard's attorneys requested a hearing on their client's claim of innocence. They were supported by a provision in Missouri law, which allows a prosecutor to file a motion for a hearing before a judge in case of new evidence of a wrongful conviction. Firstly, Leonard's defense team proposed a theory about an alternative perpetrator. After a drug deal went wrong, Leonard thought he would be targeted for murder, so he quickly left town. However, the traffickers showed up at Angela's house, and failing to find him or the illicit substances they believed were hidden there, they unleashed their fury on her and her 3 young children. Secondly, the defense team obtained statements from Leonard's daughter and from Mia, her mother. Both stated that he was in California at the end of November 2004, and according to the lawyers, he could not have been the perpetrator of the crimes. These documents were subsequently presented to the Conviction Review Unit within the prosecutor's office. The following month, just hours before the execution, St. Louis County prosecutor rejected the request for a hearing before a judge, stating that the facts did not support a credible case of innocence. Concurrently, the governor refused to grant a pardon, and the United States Supreme Court also declined to intervene. Finally, on Tuesday, February 7, 2023, in the evening, everything was arranged to carry out the procedure. In his final statement, Leonard said that Muslims do not die, but live eternally in the hearts of family and friends. Taylor kicked his feet as the 5 grams of pentobarbital were administered, then took 5 or 6 deep breaths before all movement stopped. And that's the case for today. As always, I appreciate your support for my work. If you subscribe, like, and share this video, it will help me continue creating content. See you soon.